Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to do a watch list, which is where I talk about 5 films that I have seen recently that I think I should recommend or are interesting you for some reason, one reason or another. And they usually fall into the realm of what we call boutique Blu-ray, or Blu-rays that have been released from usually non-studio sources but that have interesting extras and stories that go around them. And this month is an absolute set of bangers. I have a label that I've never talked about before at all, and I have like 4 films that have something amazing about any of them, and then another film. Let's start with that other film, and I'm going to talk about 88 films release, part of their Italian collection. I'm going to talk about Tentacles. Now, Tentacles is, well, you might recognize some of the faces on here, but it's essentially, as in classic Italian cinema style of the time, an attempt to cash in on the success of Jaws or monster movies or whatever way you want to think of them, and tell a story in that world in a similar space of like the seaside town, the threat and the people that are, you're not concerned about lost life and worried about profits, all of that kind of Jaws style hokum that went with that. Now, suffice to say, Jaws for me is one of the greatest films of all time. It's almost perfect in what it sets out to do and what it executes, and is a real staple of anybody wanting to get into more thrilling or horror cinema of some sort, even though it's by Spielberg. Anyway, Tentacles sort of plays on that idea, but instead of a shark, it's an octopus. I mean, who would ever made the parallels? Kind of genius, and it isn't totally point for point in terms of setup and in terms of storytelling, insofar as it's about deep sea drilling and the effects and kind of messing with the ecosystem down there. So there is definitely a thread of like, don't mess with the ecology of the world. It's kind of like environmental storytelling ahead of its time, the dangers of messing with the environment, and it has some, I'd say, rather big names in it. No, Shelley Winters is in it, and Henry Fonda's in it. But by and large, they are bystanding characters. They're great people to put on the cover. And what a cover, by the way. Like, oh, is it a great film in the level of Jaws? I mean, it's definitely not. But my God, if you like Jaws, you're going to see a lot of fun in this. And it's very much a take on that, where you'll poke fun and you'll kind of celebrate some of the things that are great about it. Like the reveal of the threat, if you want, at the start of it. I mean, it's sort of at the very start of the movie, but like, let's just say that it involves a baby, and it's a great scene. You can sort of see it happening in slow motion. You know what's going to happen, but even when it happens, it's still an awful lot of fun, and one that I definitely think is worth checking out. I mean, the 88 films collection range is one that continues to go from strength to strength. You think they've run out of great Italian films, but it's not likely to happen. This one has a rather extensive commentary between 3 people, which has got Troy Harth, who's in a lot of the Italian commentary tracks, Nathaniel Thompson, and then Eugenio Orcolani, who I sort of credit with putting together an awful lot of what makes this Italian collection great for 88 at the moment. Lots of interviews, but lots of people that are involved in different stages of the process. You know, for many of them, they made a number of films, but this one kind of sits within their body of work and how it sort of feels to them many years later, whether it was important or not important, or whether they had fun with it. These releases from 88 films, especially in the Italian collection, but you could also say the same about the martial arts films and the Asia collection that they have, are just continue to be something that you'll stick in the player and you go, give me an hour and a half of solid fun. Something's not too long, it's not too short, but is just right. Next up is Vinegar Syndrome title. Oh man. So this is one that I was prompted to by MV Films, Graham's Discord server. A lot of people are in there when I kind of put it, say, look, I'm in the mood for one of the Vinegar Syndrome releases for this year. I'm way behind, I'm watching. What do you think's a good one? And a lot of people had said, look Chris, you gotta try Undefeatble. Not only has it got a smashing slipcover, but it's got Cynthia Rothrock, and it's quite possibly one of the worst films ever made. However, it's one of the worst films ever made in exactly the pitch perfect ways, to the point that I think it's borderline genius. Everything's hammy or shot seriously but not seriously. I can't imagine that this was all totally played straight maybe it was, but see if it was, everybody must have been in the joke, because as even alludes to in the extras, some of the scenes in it are kind of those kind of barrel things that you put in on YouTube or otherwise, or on TikTok, and say this is the greatest fight scene I've ever seen, because again, it's phenomenally like over the top, it's ridiculous. But essentially, what is Undefeatable about? Gang culture, gang wars. Cynthia Rothrock goes around going to these staged fights where she makes money from the betting of it. And on the side, there is a guy who is a kind of arena fighter, so to speak, where he keeps on winning. He's a great fighter, but he's in a relationship, and he's a very abusive person. And the person he's in a relationship basically leaves him. And he reenacts and acts out on the fact that she's left him by going to look for her, but not being able to find her, picks women that look sort of like her, dress like her, and murders them, essentially in really brutal and terrible ways. And then you've got the cops who are out to catch him. The cops obviously are very good at fighting and kung fu as well. Like, the whole thing's very stagey. It's utterly ridiculous. Like I say, it's over the top. Lots of eye acting. I can't do eye acting. I do eyebrow acting. It's not as effective, but lots of that acting with their eyes, as people see. And it is just, it's like, it's so entertaining because it's so over the top and awful in some ways. Like, people say they like bad movies, and I'm not even saying this is totally terrible, because actually the plot of it's decent, and you'll never be bored. Plus, like, the ultimate joke of his is it's in 4K. I mean, that's like a film like this being on 4K and having that kind of effort in it, and in this beautiful package, and when the amount of extras it has, is ultimately the biggest celebration of that type of film that you can think of, insofar as it's funny, it's ridiculous. You'll find yourself giggling at things that you probably weren't supposed to giggle to, but that I think everybody will giggle at. Like I say, borderline genius is Undefeatable, and one that I hardly recommend for anybody wanting to have a really good, fun time with a film that sort of likes those genre kung fu films that come from New York, etc. Next up is a Warner Archive title, one that I picked up and threw in, and it has a pretty great cast in it, and a sort of surprising cast, because a lot of the more familiar people that we know of aren't necessarily the big names. Like, for instance, Ginger Rogers in this film is a bit part actor, but it's mostly Joan Blondell, stars in Gold Diggers of 1933. Gold Diggers of 1933 is, on the face of it, a kind of very schmaltzy film made just after the, just during the American Depression. It's made in 33, released in 33, where they were looking at the effects of the American Depression on the theatre industry. So we had a group of women living together, and they're just desperate to get on and make a show and have a good time. But every time they get forward in a production, the production runs out of money and the producer runs out of money, and they can't fulfill that dream. And, you know, it's very glitzy style film of that time, but ultimately these girls are down on their luck. But up the way from where they live is a man who sings at night, but writes great songs, and fast forward through a bit of it, he becomes a songwriter for the new show that's about the American Depression, and it becomes a bit of a light-hearted romance, because he has a secret, a story, and it becomes like almost a farce in terms of the multiple stages of romance that are going along. It becomes about class, it becomes about money, it becomes about people with opportunity and those without. And then the last 15 minutes, come on. It has a lot of great numbers in it, musical numbers. But the last one, spoiler, I didn't know about this, and it might, you know, by all accounts, going with the extras, this is very famed for being like this. But it hadn't reached my zeitgeist, and my understanding. But the sequence at the end, it's done by Buzz B. Berkeley, who's very famous for Warner. These very outlandish, over-the-top, staged, choreographed ensemble pieces. The one at the end is like the biggest 180 tonal shift from the rest of the movie that you've ever thought about, and it is one of the most political points that you'll ever see in a movie of this point. It's obviously pre-code as well, but it makes this an incredible film. The impact that last number has, that they go all out on, is just unbelievable. Like, it's one of the greatest parts of cinema history in just that 15 minutes encapsulation. And while a lot of it just kind of rolls along and you kind of have fun with it to a certain point, and then that last number starts and it's like, oh, is this a different film? Except that they kind of reference it sort of a bit before earlier on. It's just absolutely incredible. Second to last is, well, it's a Studio Canal general release of a Mike Leigh film, a frankly ridiculous cast. It has Leslie Manville, Timothy Spall, who's been seen obviously in a lot of Mike Leigh films, James Corden, Ruth Sheen, Sally Hawkins, Daniel Mays. It's unbelievable. It's All or Nothing. And All or Nothing is a film that I think is sort of been pigeonholed as a very depressing film. It follows a group of characters who are in hard times. They have really no money. They live in poverty. They live in these high-rise flats, and they're trying to eke out day to day their existence. Leslie Manville plays a character who works in a local supermarket. She's married to Tim Spall's character, who's a taxi driver, who's a bit lazy, and they have a son, James Corden, who's just classic Kevin, if you know the Harry Enfield reference, but he's always angry, and he's overweight, and life just seems hard for him. All or Nothing celebrates the characters and actually gives you this crumb the whole way through that you hope something will be better for them as they go through. All or Nothing is a film that needs reappreciated because it is both powerful, it is both telling, and it is in all the best ways films about normal British people. It celebrates people's resilience and ultimate hope that they just want something just a little bit better for themselves. They're not looking for outlandish riches. They're not, and they want to do it together. And it's just, by the end of it, it is a film about hope. It is a film about something other than that. The ending was surprising in some ways, predictable in others, and really uses the power of the performances the whole way through. Daniel Mays' character is just one of the most vile, horrible characters that you'll ever think of. But the extras that go through here, when they interview a lot of the main actors that are in it, and they talk about their time, and they talk about the Mike Leigh process, which, look, if you know what the Mike Leigh process, you know what it is. I think this release actually does a better job than maybe even something like Secrets and Lies, which was a more celebrated film. This is very akin to Secrets and Lies in a lot of ways. So if you like Mike Leigh's films, you will love All or Nothing. And like I say, it's a long movie, just about 2 hours, but one that definitely needs a reappraisal. And this is a great disc. Like the special features with the interview with the cast, it's almost like a making of documentary after the fact, those characters looking back. And then they have an interview with Dick Pope, who's a cinematographer, and one with Mike Leigh himself. The whole thing is actually a very deluxe package, and it does have a really lovely slipcover, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. And then the last film that I'm going to talk about is from a new label that I've never talked about, but a very well established label. It is Kino Lorber. Now, I was speaking to my good friend Elliot not that long ago, and he was telling me about some of the titles that he was enjoying. I thought, God, I'll pick a couple of these up, just give it a go. And I was looking at my cart and I was thinking, God, if I just put one more item in the back basket, I'll nearly get it for half price because of how the discount system works. And I was looking through, and you know that bit when you're trying to add something else to the basket and you kind of think, right, I'll do a bit of more research because I have the ones that I want to add. And you get to a couple of titles and you start looking at the trailers, and I looked at the trailer for this and went, no, this seems a bit madcap. This doesn't seem right. Went on to Letterboxd, was narrowing them down, and I seen a review by a friend of the channel, Tim, Feeling Blue on Instagram, and he'd given it 4 stars. And Tim's not somebody who gives 4 stars out easy. He had written a bit of a blurb. This is Electra Glide in blue, and this, while I didn't know at the time, is the only directorial release from the director, James William Guercio, who was a composer by the main, and I'll come back to the music later on. This film blew me away. It's nothing like the trailer. It bears little or no resemblance to the trailer. It basically tells the story of a cop who is a highway cop, so to speak, or the freeway cop. He drives around his bike and he stops people for minor offences, but he's very straight-laced. He doesn't bend the rules. It's just who he is. And he dreams of having a better life, or being a detective, you know, getting away from the bike and the monotony of that. And he thinks he'd be good enough. And one of the events that come along kind of give him that opportunity to kind of venture into that world and do the more glitzy, glamorous side of being a detective. Yes, indeed. And using his skills and his analytic skills, which we at the viewer think he's very good for. But then the film examines that, you know, who somebody is, their past, what their skill set is, and put them in a different world, and how that shapes whether they can fit into the new role or whether they can't. There's kind of a bit of a back and a forward about that. The whole thing is just a magnificent example of layered storytelling. As things change, as we appreciate things change, and at the head of it all is a murder mystery that we can follow. So very classic 70s, early 80s American filmmaking at the time. And it ends in, the last 15-20 minutes where it sort of ends multiple times, but adds another layer, another thing to think about, and the final shot is unbelievable. It ends in a song picture combination that is perfect. And it's not a famous song. It's a song that I went to look for up on Apple Music, Spotify. You can't find it. It's literally written by the guy who directed the film. And he put it together, and it matches perfectly. And while he was a first-time director, and this was made for actually not very much money, Conrad Hall was his camera person, his DP on this. And Conrad Hall is somebody, you know, in my opinion, probably the greatest cinematographer that has ever lived. I think of his body of work, and I think about how much he elevated films from good to great, or great to extraordinary. It's him, and he took his fee from the director, and he basically shoots a western in terms of color. You know, the influence of John Ford on the director is very, you can see that here, and some very obvious references to John Ford and some less so. But then in the inside scenes, Conrad Hall goes to play, and the man's just an absolute master at it. And Electric Light and Blue is about the strong recommendation I can give people. It is one of the best first time watches I've seen this year for sure, and one that didn't half surprise me. And as usually stories go, it's out of the ones that I thought I would like out of the bunch, it's the one that I like the most by some distance. And that is my watch list. Have you seen any of these? Have you ventured into more Kino Lorber stuff that's been released recently? Obviously the 4Ks are out there. They're very expensive, and in a lot of cases I have very good Blu-ray versions of those films, so it's something I'll keep an eye out for the next while, but we'll see how it goes. What have you been watching recently? What have you been enjoying? I hope you're taking care of yourself, and I'll speak to you again soon on the channel. Take care. All the best.